In a quiet American town where flags fly high and neighbors share morning greetings, one simple memorial in a veteran's yard sparked a battle no one expected, a battle between honor and control. Before we dive into this powerful true story, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps bring more real stories of courage to light. It started on a calm autumn morning, the kind where the air holds a soft chill and the leaves scatter across trimmed suburban lawns. In that peaceful neighborhood lived Thomas Hale, a 67-year-old Army veteran who had served 2 tours overseas. He wasn't wealthy, nor was he loud or demanding. Thomas was the kind of man who stood a little straighter than everyone else, the kind of man who still paused before raising the flag each morning. For years, he'd lived in the same modest house on Maple Ridge Lane. The community knew him. Kids waved at him. Neighbors trusted him. And Thomas, he kept to himself, spending most days tending his garden, fixing old radios in his garage, and volunteering at the local Veterans Center. But this year was different. This year marked the 10th anniversary of losing his best friend and fellow soldier, Marcus Reed, who never made it home. Thomas felt something heavy in his chest as the date approached. Something unresolved, something sacred. So he decided to honor Marcus in the only way that felt right, by placing a simple, respectful memorial in his front yard, a small granite stone, a miniature American flag, and Marcus's service tag engraved beneath the words, "In memory of a friend who never returned." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't big. It wasn't political. It was personal, deeply personal. But in neighborhoods governed by HOAs, even the most personal things can become a battleground. 2 days later, as the morning sun warmed the sidewalks, an official-looking envelope appeared on Thomas's doorstep. The bold letters across the top read, "Notice of violation, show regulation breach." Thomas stared at it for a long moment, the quiet of the street suddenly feeling heavier. When he opened it, the message was blunt. Unauthorized yard structure. Remove the memorial within 7 days or face fines and legal action. Read the sentence twice, then a third time. A memorial? Unauthorized? He knew the HOA could be strict. They once fined a neighbor because their trash bin was visible for 2 extra hours. But this? A memorial for a fallen soldier. Thomas didn't get angry, not yet. But something inside him shifted, a slow burn rising from deep in his chest. He folded the letter calmly, set it on his kitchen table, and whispered to himself, "Not this time. Not for Marcus." Little did he know, the small, quiet decision he made that morning would ignite a chain of events that would pull the entire town into a showdown between powerful HOA board members and a veteran who had already survived far worse than paperwork threats. And in the end, it would be the town, not the HOA, who decided what honor truly meant. The next morning, James was sitting on his porch, sipping his usual black coffee, when he noticed a white SUV slowly rolling to a stop in front of his house. The door opened, and out stepped Derek Caldwell, the newly appointed HOA president, a man barely in his 30s, always dressed like he was running for office. Behind him walked 2 board members holding clipboards as if they were on a mission. James set his cup down. He already knew what this was. Caldwell walked up the driveway with a confident stride, but there was a certain stiffness in his posture, the kind that belonged to someone who'd never been challenged before. "Mr. Carter," Caldwell greeted, his voice sharp but polite. "We received a report from a few residents. Something about a structure in your yard?" James didn't blink. "Structure? You talking about the memorial?" Caldwell exhaled loudly, like he had been waiting for that word. "Yes, the memorial." He said the word memorial without the slightest respect. James stood straighter. "It honors the men I served with, those who didn't come home." Caldwell flipped open the HOA handbook. "I understand that, but according to Section 14F, Item 7, residents are not allowed to install unapproved structures, monuments, or displays in visible areas." James looked him dead in the eye. "Is this really what you're doing today?" Caldwell forced a smile. "Rules keep the community looking clean and uniform. We can't make exceptions." Behind him, the 2 board members nodded like obedient shadows. James's voice stayed calm. "Did you actually read the memorial plaque?" "No," Caldwell replied instantly. "Because it doesn't matter. What matters is compliance. That was the sentence that cut deep. To Caldwell, this wasn't a tribute. It was a problem, a violation, a box to check off. James crossed his arms, the scars on his knuckles catching the morning light. You're asking me to remove something that cost me more than you'll ever understand. One of the board members, a woman named Marlene, spoke up nervously. Mr. Carter, you're a respected member of this community, but the rules apply to everyone, even veterans. James didn't react. He just raised an eyebrow, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Caldwell added, you have 7 days to remove it, or you'll be fined. He handed James a notice and turned to leave. But before he could get to the SUV, Mrs. Whitaker, James's elderly neighbor, stepped out of her house, anger burning in her eyes. You're giving him a citation? For honoring soldiers? She shouted. Caldwell stiffened. Ma'am, this doesn't concern... Oh, it concerns all of us, she snapped back. That memorial has more dignity than your entire office. Several other neighbors came out, quietly watching. Even those who didn't always interact with James knew what he had given, what he had lost. The board members exchanged awkward glances. James didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The community was speaking for him. But Caldwell wasn't the type to back down. His ego wouldn't allow it. This is final, he announced loudly. The memorial must be gone in 7 days. He got into his SUV, slammed the door, and drove off, leaving a cloud of hostility behind him. James looked down at the notice, a small, white piece of paper that somehow felt heavier than the memorial's stone. 7 days. 7 days to erase something sacred. 7 days to pretend his brothers never existed. 7 days to comply with an HOA that didn't understand sacrifice. Mrs. Whitaker placed a gentle hand on his arm. You don't have to take this, James. He nodded slowly. I won't. But his voice wasn't angry. It was steady. Controlled. Because men like James didn't fight out of rage. They fought out of principle. That night, James sat at his kitchen table staring at the citation. Next to it lay a stack of old letters, dog tags and photographs, the last remaining. Pieces of men whose families still called him every Memorial Day. He wasn't just defending a slab of stone. He was defending their memory. And the HOA had no idea what they had just ignited. Little did they know by morning, this wasn't going to be just a neighborhood dispute. It was going to be a battle the whole town would remember, because James wasn't alone, and the HOA was about to learn exactly what happens when you push a veteran too far. The next morning, Tom didn't wake up to the quiet calm of Maple Ridge. He woke up to a storm he never asked for. The HOA had doubled down. Not only did they place another violation notice on his door, they added a new line, one that made Tom pause longer than he expected. Failure to remove the unauthorized structure may result in daily fines. Daily fines. For 3 small brass plaques honoring men who gave their lives. Tom stood there reading the paper, the cool morning air mixing with a slow burn rising in his chest. He wasn't angry for himself. He was angry for the soldiers whose stories were now being treated like weeds, something the HOA wanted uprooted and thrown away. But Tom wasn't the only one who saw the notice. As he stepped outside, his neighbor Jeremy, a young father of 2 and an Air Force veteran himself, walked over. Tom, they really did this again? His voice wasn't shocked. It was disappointed. The kind of disappointment that speaks louder than outrage. Tom nodded. They're not backing down. Jeremy took a breath and said something Tom wasn't expecting. Then maybe it's time the neighborhood shows them they're not the only ones who get a say. A simple idea. But those kinds of ideas have built entire revolutions. Later that afternoon, Jeremy posted a message on the community forum. If honoring fallen heroes is against the rules, maybe the rules need fixing. Within minutes, comments began pouring in. The HOA is out of control. This is America. If a veteran can't honor his brothers here, what is this place? Tom has my full support. My dad served. That memorial stays. People didn't just agree, they felt insulted on Tom's behalf. News travels fast in small towns, but outrage travels even faster. By the end of the day, nearly half the neighborhood had chimed in. Parents, teachers, young couples, elderly residents who had lived there, since the street was nothing but gravel and old oak roots. Some didn't know Tom personally, but they knew what that memorial meant. And then something unexpected happened. Just as the HOA tried to quiet the conversation, a local reporter caught wind of the online thread. She reached out to Tom, asking if she could stop by and hear his story. Tom, humble as always, resisted. "This isn't about attention," he said. "It never was." Jeremy stepped in. "Tom, sometimes the right kind of attention brings the right kind of pressure." Tom reluctantly agreed. The reporter arrived that evening with a small camera, a notepad, and an expression that told, "Tom, she came not for a headline, but for the truth." He walked her through the memorial, the flagpole, the polished stone, the plaques etched with the names of the soldiers he served, with names he could say from memory without blinking, names he still saw in dreams. The reporter listened quietly, respectfully, letting Tom speak freely, never interrupting, never trying to twist the narrative. When she finally asked what pushed him to build the memorial, Tom said something that would later echo across the entire town. "Because forgetting them would hurt more than anything the HOA could find me for." Those words, those simple, honest words, would soon become the spark that lit up the whole community. Tom didn't know it yet, but by dawn, Maple Ridge wasn't going to be the same anymore. Not the HOA, not the neighbors, not even the quiet little street he had called home for 18 years. The sun began to climb over Maple Ridge the next morning, but the street felt strangely different, quieter, heavier, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. People peeked through curtains, neighbors whispered in driveways, and every conversation circled back to one man and one memorial. By 8 a.m., everyone knew. The HOA's board had officially filed a complaint against Samuel "Sam" Carter, decorated Army veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and quiet hero of their town. They wanted him to remove the memorial he built for 3 fallen brothers in arms. But something unexpected happened. The moment the news spread, an energy sparked across the community, soft at first, then growing like a wildfire lit by a single match. It started with Mrs. Thompson, the retired school teacher living across the street. She stepped out of her house holding a small bouquet of white lilies. She walked slowly, stopping at the edge of Sam's lawn, then placed the flowers gently beside the memorial. She wiped her eyes, whispered a prayer, and walked away. Within minutes, more neighbors emerged. A construction worker in dusty boots, a nurse still in scrubs, a teenager from down the block holding a small American flag he normally stuck in the spokes of his bike. They all approached the memorial with quiet reverence, leaving tokens of respect, flowers, flags, handwritten notes. Someone placed a laminated card that read, "For the man who didn't come home, and the man who did." By 10 a.m., the memorial wasn't just Sam's anymore. It belonged to the whole town. But the HOA didn't see it that way. They called it a violation. The town called it a tribute, and a storm was coming. The HOA's second strike. HOA President Linda Marsh returned to the neighborhood with a printed folder and an attitude sharp enough to cut steel. She wasn't used to being challenged, and definitely not by an entire community. She marched straight toward Sam's property with 2 board members trailing her like nervous shadows. "This is unacceptable," she barked. "This is a legal matter. Personal opinions do not override HOA rules." But today, she wasn't talking to Sam. She was talking to the crowd. Nearly 50 neighbors stood lined along the sidewalk. Teachers, soldiers, firefighters, parents holding their children, forming a human wall between Linda and the memorial. Sam wasn't even outside yet. The sheriff arrives. A sheriff's SUV turned the corner and rolled to a slow stop. Sheriff Reynolds stepped out, a man respected by everyone, including Sam, whom he had known since high school. Linda smiled with smug relief. The crowd froze. Sam finally stepped outside. Reynolds looked at Sam first, then at the memorial, then at the sea of neighbors behind him. Linda thrust paperwork toward him. "Sheriff, the HOA is requesting enforcement support. He is violating Code 14B. We want the memorial removed." Reynolds didn't touch the papers. Instead, he asked calmly, "Is anyone disturbed by this memorial?" A chorus rose from the crowd. "No. No, sir. It should stay. It honors real heroes. We support Sam." Linda's face reddened with frustration. The HOA rules exist for a reason. The community voted for structure, uniformity, consistency. Reynolds raised one hand, silencing her mid-sentence. And sometimes, he said, the community decides when a rule is worth challenging. He turned to Sam. Mr. Carter, is this memorial important to you? Sam swallowed hard. His voice was steady but thick with emotion. It's not just a memorial, Sheriff. These men died saving my life. Every morning I walk outside, I see their names. It reminds me to earn the life I still get to live. The sheriff nodded. Then he spoke the words that would ripple across the town for years. I won't enforce the removal of a memorial honoring American soldiers. If the HOA wants to escalate this, they can speak to a judge. But I'm not touching it. The crowd erupted in soft applause, respectful but powerful. Linda stared at him, speechless. For the first time, the HOA realized they were losing control, the meeting that changed everything. By afternoon, the town hall was packed, standing room only. People held signs. Let the memorial stay. Honor our veterans. Respect the fallen. Even the mayor showed up, leaning against the back wall with arms crossed. Watching the tension unfold like the first act of a drama. He already knew the ending, too. Linda stood at the podium, fuming. She rattled on about regulations, property values, uniform aesthetics, and other lines that sounded empty compared to the weight of the moment. Then she said the sentence that pushed the room over the edge. This memorial disrupts the visual harmony of the neighborhood. The gasps were instant. A veteran in a wheelchair raised his hand to speak. His voice trembled, but it carried the force of history. Ma'am, with all due respect, the only harmony you should be worried about is the kind that comes from honoring the people who risked everything for your freedom. A wave of applause shook the room. Linda tried to respond, but the mayor finally stepped forward. He looked at Sam first. The man who spent decades serving a country that now stood ready to defend him. Then he spoke with calm authority. The town stands with this veteran. The memorial stays. Cheers thundered across the hall. People hugged, clapped, wiped tears from their eyes. Sam bowed his head, overwhelmed. For years, he had carried the weight of his brother's sacrifice. Today, for the first time, the town helped him carry it. The HOA's defeat. The HOA board held an emergency vote later that night. 3 members resigned on the spot. Half the neighborhood petitioned to completely restructure the HOA leadership. And by sunrise, Linda Marsh, the once unshakable president, submitted her resignation. Not because she wanted to, but because the community demanded it. The neighborhood wasn't just restored. It was reborn. The morning of the town. Hearing arrived with a kind of tension people usually associate with courtroom dramas. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Neighbors held handmade signs. Veterans, young, old, retired, active, stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a quiet wall of support. But inside, the atmosphere was different. It was still, heavy, waiting. At the front table sat the HOA board, rigid suits, polished glasses, folders stacked like shields. They expected a short hearing, a procedural formality, a simple reaffirmation of their authority. But what they got was something else entirely. When the council chair invited public comment, the room shifted. Every seat creaked. Every breath seemed to gather into one unified presence. And then Michael's neighbor, Mrs. Hawthorne, the kindly 74-year-old grandmother, everyone knew from church bake sales, slowly stood up. Her voice was soft but steady. She explained how her husband had died in a foreign conflict when she was only 24, how she raised her son alone, how she wished memorials like Michael's existed back then, because maybe someone else would have understood the weight of her silence, her grief, her fear. The room didn't move. It didn't blink. Another neighbor spoke, and then another. A retired police officer stepped forward and described nights. He had been comforted just walking past that small wooden bench, knowing someone else understood the burden of service. A single mother with 2 children said her boys stopped at the memorial every morning on their way to school because it made them feel safe. Then came the veterans. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't attack. They simply shared stories, raw, unpolished moments that most civilians never hear. Stories of brothers not returning home. Stories of nights spent awake, wishing they could forget what they saw. Stories of how one small tribute in a small town meant more than the HOA could ever understand. Finally, the council chair called Michael forward. He didn't bring a dramatic speech. He didn't need one. Michael placed a single photograph on the podium. His squad, all 6 of them, all smiling, all unaware that 2 weeks later, only Michael would make it home. He spoke about them, not as soldiers, but as people. What they liked to joke about, what they dreamed of, what promises they left unfinished. And then he said the only sentence that truly mattered. This memorial isn't for me. It's for the ones who never got the chance to grow old. Silence stretched so long and so deep that even the cameras stopped clicking. And then, for the first time since the issue began, the council members looked at one another, not sternly, not defensively, but as people confronted with something undeniable. This wasn't a yard dispute. This was a matter of honor. When the vote came, it was unanimous. A clear, resounding, the memorial stays. Not only that, the council proposed turning the memorial into an officially recognized town landmark, protected under the community's historical and cultural guidelines. A yearly remembrance ceremony would be held there. Local students would learn its meaning. Newcomers would hear its story. The HOA board tried to object, but they had already lost the people long before they lost the vote. Outside, the crowd erupted, not with noise, but with gratitude. Veterans saluted. Families hugged. The town mayor placed a hand on Michael's shoulder and thanked him for giving the town a reminder it desperately needed. That night, the memorial lights glowed brighter than ever. Children placed small paper flags around the bench. Elderly couples paused and whispered prayers. And Michael, he simply sat on the bench, looking up at the stars, knowing that somewhere, the brothers he lost were finally honored the way they deserved. The HOA never challenged him again. In fact, something remarkable happened. They quietly updated their guidelines, adding a clause that allowed respectful memorials dedicated to service members. The page included a note at the bottom. This amendment was inspired by the courage of one veteran and the unity of one. Extraordinary town. The memorial became a permanent part of their community's identity, and the town never forgot the lesson. Sometimes rules hold a neighborhood together, but honor is what holds a community together. And that honor began with one man, one story, and a small wooden bench that became a symbol for an entire town.